So with the strap now on the engine, just there on the front of the engine head, all we need to do now is connect up our crane and pull it on out. Every time I tilt it more that way, it just drains even more coolant out onto the floor. Wonderful. So the higher I get, the more I just want to make sure I'm clearing everything. So there's a little bit of finagling to get it around this air conditioning pipe. There's loads of stuff here that can get caught on the engine, fuel lines and stuff, bits of cable. Hoses have all been pretty easy to keep out of the way. Starter motor wasn't a problem. Just stayed all the way down there where it was supposed to. Nothing found on any of the suspension or subframe. This part here is probably the tightest part, I would say, just because of all these plastic bits and all this pipe work. You can snag something pretty easy. What you don't want to do is smash to pieces any of this stuff here. You can see I'm actually touching at the moment. So what I'm doing is, as I crane it up, I'm pushing it out of the way, and then when I'm not touching it, I'm just gently letting it rest on there. Just need to be really real careful and just sort of go up a little bit and then walk around again and just have a look and make sure nothing is snagging. If you pull something off, like I don't know, let's just say this one here for example, random example. If you pull that off, it can actually like cost you days sometimes, because if you can't find the right connector to go on it, then it can cause all kinds of problems. And anyway, even if you can fix it there and then, like depinning it and putting in more wire, stuff like that, it's just more time that you don't really want to or need to spend. Anyway, let's pull this the rest of the way out. think if I was going to try and do this again, I would actually drop the car just a touch, just because I think my crane is getting pretty close to like full lift, or is at full lift. I will be able to get this out, but it would be really annoying if you'd already lifted it this far and then realised you had to drop the car down. Yeah. Anyway, lesson learned. So there's 213s, gearbox bolts up top. I'm gonna get these out first. Bolt number 1. I want to keep track of where these come from in case they're different lengths and what have you. And 2 up top are the same length. 1 gearbox bolt just here behind where the starter motor lived. Another one just below it. Ah, that's nice. All of the gearbox bolts at the moment seem to be similar. These two here aren't the same though. If you look at those, they're slightly different length and have a slightly different shank. So we need to now remember where they go. Got a little bracket here in the middle which is covering one of the gearbox bolts. If you were doing a clutch in this car, I think this would be the hardest, most stupid bolt to get to. Because I think it would involve basically dropping the DPF, which is insane. I suspect what most people probably do, if you can, is get in there with the spanner under all the other gearbox bolts and then slowly pull the gearbox away from the engine while undoing the nut. But yeah, a bit crazy that. Just leave that on the engine for now. We've lost our socket. Take 2. Remember the orientation of that bracket. Okay. So that's all of the gearbox bolts. I've put one back in the top up here just to hold it on, just in case if it fell off. So I'll turn the gearbox around to face me. I might even lower it a little bit. We're still quite high on the crane at the moment. You don't really want to be trying to drag stuff off of that. Crane might come over on you. That'd probably hurt. In fact, it'd probably kill you actually if that landed on your head. Anyway, be careful. I've been messing around with this for like 2 or 3 minutes now, and I'm worried that the gearbox is going to come straight off, and I'm just not feeling that strong this morning. Usually I just grab the gearbox and do the bolt and just carry it off, but I've just lowered it a little further to the ground, and I'm going to take this bolt out, and if the gearbox just drops off, then so be it. and we're off. So there's our flywheel and our clutch. There's inside the gearbox. Not too bad, seen worse. Cool. Just have to remove the clutch. Cool. So the bolt's out, just give it a gentle tap. Yeah, she's stuck. Wow, it's really stuck. It's gonna be one of those freaking clutches that flies off at me, innit? Yeah. It's stuck on the dowels. Come on, let me have it. You don't really want to be on there. Trust me, I know you. Ready? Well, whoever last had this car got their money's worth out of that clutch. Worn right down to the rivets and then some. In fact, it looks like... Has it slipped? It looks like part of this pressure plate has actually moved around on itself. Could be wrong. Anyway, it's definitely totally worn out. There we go. Oh, she's out. Things are getting a bit tight this morning between the car and my workbench and the crane and then the stand underneath it. So I think what we're probably going to do is I'm going to get my tray out of here, take off all the rubbish, clean that up, ready for the next job, which is going to be tomorrow, I think, on a different car. So I want to try and do as much on this old Ford as I can, and in the meantime I've stripped down the block. Pretty much of all the stuff that I think I might possibly ever need, including bolts and studs and stuff. I think this is the only stud left actually. And now we're just gonna get the new end, get this off the stand, move that to one side, move all this stuff out of the way, and then get the new engine down here. So I've got my scrapyard engine here, and there's a few bits and pieces on here I'm not 100% familiar with. I'm familiar with the engine generally, but I've never done an engine replacement on it. So there's many connectors, and bearing in mind I got this engine with the head completely, well, not the head, the cam carrier completely removed, and the valve cover and all the injectors and stuff, they were already off and out of the car. So a lot of this stuff, I'm sure I can figure it out, but it would have been easier if I actually had a complete engine and I was just doing like for like. Like for example, these connectors here, these two. So these will be in the car somewhere on the loom, and I've got no idea, you know, well, I wouldn't have had an idea where they went, but now I've got a reference to work to. So I'm going to pull the loom off of this. I can't reuse any of these because the loom, it's like standard scrapyard stuff, they just cut it. fair enough. Keeps corrosion out of the pins and what have you, so you know we never get mad about that. But I just need to pull that off and out of the way because it's useless. So I've removed the loom from the old engine. I've got the head from the engine which is broken, and I'm just gonna pull the studs out for the exhaust manifold because I need these for my replacement engine. So I'm gonna have to remove all of these. And on this engine, these bolts, well, they're not actually bolts, they're technically studs, but they are E8s, so it is a female socket that you need, female torque socket, E8. And yeah, just wind them all out and then put them into the new head. So we've always got to be mindful that we don't damage anything when we're putting this back together. And I just noticed the threads on this stud look a little bit damaged, and I didn't realise that when I first put it in, but I can wind it in a few bits by hand, then it stops. When I try to do it up with the impact some more, it doesn't feel right. So whenever you run into something like that, the best thing to do is, and I've moved it somewhere, is to grab a hand tool and just try and do it up by hand and see how it feels. So we'll just start winding that in. It does feel a little bit tight, as in too tight for what it should be by hand, so I assume there's a bit of gunk in the threads, but it is going in. Yeah, see, it's going in a few threads and then it kind of jams again. So there might just be a little something in one of the threads. If you do this up with an impact and then it catches at the wrong point, you can strip out a whole thread, whereas putting it in by hand, you know, basically you can fit the thing and it's fine. So you just need to feel it, basically. That's why I always put these in by hand first, get a feel for them, and if they feel good and they go in like sort of, you know, a turn or two by hand. Yeah, there we go, that's it. Then you know, just whip them in with the impact briefly, but you definitely don't over tighten these studs. They go in, well, they're barely tight at all actually. You should be able to, when you get this out, they should all come out pretty easily with just a very short 1/4 inch ratchet, so they don't need much. Cool, so now what I've done is I've put on the turbo, which is connected to the exhaust manifold in my case, and then we need to put on these little spacers which go on here, and then all of these nuts like so. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do them all up finger tight first, and then give them a 1/4 turn with a ratchet. Then I'm going to torque them down to spec, and I'll show you the pattern for that. But for just hand tightening it, you don't need to worry about pattern, whatever's easiest. Okay, so starting from the middle, going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 at the bottom, 9, and then 10. Basically you just want to start your way from here, go up, then down, then across to up, then across to down to the next one, then up, and then across to down. You see what I mean? Like a zigzag pattern basically. So what you want to do is start from the middle, and you want to tighten this down evenly going out in both directions. You don't want to tighten up one side first, because it will make this side here kink out. Then when you tighten down this side here, you may find the bolts over here aren't tight anymore. So there is a procedure to it. Start from the middle, work your way out. So I've put a jack underneath the engine just to stop it from moving backwards and forwards, and now I'm just going to slide the gearbox on. It must be the summer heat that's doing me in, because I just could not put that gearbox on that engine for the life of me. I just didn't have the strength, so I've tipped the engine on its side, and this way I can use gravity to my favour and push the gearbox in this end. Just going to get the alternator fed up in there. Okay, so from here you can see on the back of the alternator we have these sort of like bolts with a I don't know how to describe it really. It's one way basically, so as you put the bolt in, it has its own little cone shape to it, and that pulls the alternator in tighter. There's two of those. These two sides are 16mm. There's one here on the top, which I'm doing up by hand, and then there is one here underneath the alternator, which is also 16mm with the same sort of fluted head. And then on the other side of the alternator, we have one 13mm up here, and then we have another 13mm down here, and they go onto this bracket here. So with the alternator, you just want to make sure you've got the insert inside the bracket. You can see there it has a tapered sort of dowel here, I suppose you could call it. It has like a split in it, so that it tightens up with tension as it goes into the hole. And you can see here, as it comes up onto the bolt itself, you can see how it seats itself on that bevel. So you definitely need to make sure that you install both of these into the alternator bracket, otherwise it will keep tightening, but it will never be properly tight. There we go. There's a little trick to getting these tensioners to go in. There's a special tool that you can buy from Ford to line up in, there's two holes, oh you can't see it on the screen, I'll show you in a second. There's a special tool that you're supposed to use to, well, essentially to line up the auxiliary belt, but it is not necessary, which I'll show you in a second to undo. We'll just do up this second bolt here, and the third bolt is kind of off to an angle, so we'll do that one there in a second. Okay, so once it is mostly out of the way, you need to tighten up the two 10mm around the outside, and then get a 15mm spanner on there. You need to tap it on. Okay, now very carefully, and I do mean carefully, try and pull the tensioner out of the way to give you access to this 10mm here in the middle, which you can do up with your 10mm socket. Sort it, and just get it as hand tight as you can with the screwdriver, and then we'll go back in here with the ratchet afterwards to break that. You know, to fully tighten it with the spanner. So bearing in mind that we've now fitted this, 3 10mm, 1, 2, 3. We've now fitted the alternator, which is 2 13s on this side, one here, 2 16s on the other side in the same location. They are the tapered bolts, which I showed you. And we also have the air conditioning left to go, but the air conditioning is still in the car, so we can't fit that yet. So essentially, right now, this is done. So we've fitted all the ancillaries on this side of the engine, and we're going to leave it there. So on my scrapyard engine, it came with the inlet manifold already fitted, which is nice. So I have fitted the alternator on this side here. I've fitted the turbo on the manifold. They were already connected, which I just pulled straight off of my old engine, and haven't really fitted much else apart from the gearbox. The bolts are not tight yet. Now that it's up at head height, I'm about to snug those down. Once that is done, I can put on the bracket for the DPF on this side here, which is about here on the engine, and then it's just a case of dropping it all in onto the mounts and then connecting up all the other stuff. So I apologise for this not being an exact how-to, but after a little bit of sort of detective work, I can see that this vacuum line here, which goes into, so this is all for the turbo, I can see that this line here comes all the way down to here, And then this is the only line that doesn't connect to itself from the engine. So this line here must connect inside the engine bay to, where are you? I've lost you. To just under here. So it's just there. So that's where that connects to. Because that's a vacuum line here. Everything else is either like a fuel line. These are fuel lines. These are coolant lines. So it has to be here, and that's the only nipple in the sort of right place. So process of elimination, that has to be the place. There can't be any other place for it. And then all of the other lines here. So like for example, this line here on the far left goes around the gearbox, around here, and then eventually ends up over here at the turbo actuator. There we go. And then the other one here goes on top of the engine. It's loose at the moment. That one there is for the airbox, I think. We're about to find out if I'm wrong or not. This may possibly be the most disjointed video that I've ever put together. But with the coronavirus, it's taking so long for parts to arrive that I need and bits and pieces. I think I must have had this car for like 2 weeks, maybe even 3 weeks now. Usually, by the time I've bought the car, I would expect to have it back together in 5 days at the very latest. By the time you buy the engine, and then you realise you need this and you need that, and you order it and it comes, and you put it all together, get it in the car, fired up, drive it for a day. You have to drive these things for at least a day, make sure there's nothing wrong with it. You can't just start it, drive it down the road and then sell it. If it comes back on you, it'd be a nightmare. So anyway, where we're at with this at the moment, or I think where I left off, was I was looking at these fuel lines here. So what we've got on the engine is we have the fuel lines here with the quick connect ends, which go to these two sections here on the car. So I think that back here, this whole section here, all the way over to the fuel filter, can simply be removed from here, because we already have a fuel filter on the car, and then we have all of the lines that go up to here, including these are all plugged in as well, which is great. So we still have this line here which goes down onto the block. So I think what I'm going to do is just pull the other thing that's going to make this a little bit easier. If I pull this out of the car, it's going to make it easier for me to drop the engine in. So I'm going to remove that first, and then we're going to work on, I think, dropping the engine in and then connecting everything back up, I hope. Okay, so to remove these fuel lines, you have to press down on this tab and then pull out, which is very, very, very difficult with one hand, but basically it's quite simple. Push that tab down, and then the fuel line should come out. Not damage anything because I need to reuse this, but yeah, that's quite simply it. The next thing that we want to do is we want to remove this little sensor here, just there. Okay, just clip the pushes up, and now we want to remove this fuel line from, there we go, from there, and now hopefully the whole thing, I believe, should be loose. There we go. So it's the fuel filter and all the fuel lines up to the injectors and what have you. The reason we don't need those anymore is that the injectors already have the fuel line connected to them, so all we need to do is connect up the sensor and the wiring harness that went on top of it, which we just unclipped. We're going to start fitting the engine now, so just take a moment just to prepare the engine bay. Anything that looks like it might be in the way, move. I have moved the starter motor down there. I've pushed back under the exhaust. There was this clutch line over here, which I've pushed onto the subframe and then over the lower arm. Those mole grips that are pinching off the clutch line might be in the way, we'll see.